So the first thing we need to talk about before we even really get going with anything else is what is discrete math? What does that mean? First of all, I want to draw your attention to what's called a homonym, which is when two words are pronounced the same but spelled differently and have different meanings. And the first thing I want you to do is pause the video and look at the difference between discrete, where it's EET, and then discrete as in the name of our course, which is ETE. Okay, so before I get too much further, I hope you'll pause the video and jot your thoughts down here. But anyway, let me tell you what I think is the best definition of discrete math. Okay, and you've heard of different types of math. I mean, when you hear algebra, you think, okay, solve for X. You hear geometry, okay, the thing with the shapes, right? What does discrete math mean? And one time, a long time ago, I had two students sitting in my office. One was in calculus, one was in discrete math. And they're waiting for my attention. And the one says to the other, you know, what math class are you taking? He says, yeah, I'm taking calculus with her. What are you taking with her? And the student says, I'm taking discrete math. And the calculus student says, well, what kind of math is that? And the discrete student said, well, you know, discrete math, it's basically like weird math. Right? And I thought, hey, that is the very best description I think I've ever heard in my life of what discrete math is, right? It's like weird math. Okay, so this is going to be very different than math that you've ever done before. And it might surprise you in a way that this is math. For example, you're hardly going to use your calculator, right? Don't panic, because we're hardly going to do any computation. Okay, that might sound really strange to you. So something else that I want you to do then, once you get this definition, I want you to just do a Google search, and let me explain why I'm asking you to do this. So again, I mentioned in a past video that one of my main roles here on campus is working with the math student teacher. So I actually teach people how to be math teachers. And research, of course, is really big, right? So I am in the fortunate position to really be up to date on what modern day research is saying about the best way that students learn. And one of the most recent things that I've read, and when I read this, I realized I've actually been using this technique for years and years without really knowing it was a technique. But the technique is just called previewing, okay? And it talked about the benefit of doing preview with students. I would call previewing just like slowly introducing, right? And so it talked about just let students, you know, don't try to immediately dump something on students and immediately expect them to understand it. Bring up a word, right? Bring it up the next day. Bring it up again a week later, right? And let students kind of slowly get to a place, and it's kind of like preparing the brain, right, to learn the meaning of that term or to understand that content. So what I'm doing here is called previewing. So another important aspect to previewing and just learning in general, and one of the things that I think is so fascinating, I hope I don't get off too much on a tangent here on this video, because this is something I love to talk about, and I wish I knew more about it than I actually know, but just sort of the theory of the way the brain learns. You can think of your brain as having like, and the official term for it is schema. And don't let me sound like I'm an, well, what would it be called? An educational psychiatrist? I don't know. The scientist who specializes in a neuroscience. That's the word I was looking for. So don't let me fool you and think I'm a neuroscientist. I'm not, right? But what I've come to learn is that you can think of your brain as having like drawers of a file cabinet. And the official word for it is schema. Okay, so we all have these like schema in our brain. And when a new piece of information enters the brain, and I like to tell my students, think of the brain as like a sticky ball. Okay, a piece of information floats into the brain, right? And so here's the information, here's your brain, right? Here's the piece of information comes in, it floats around the brain and it has to get filed somewhere. Right? And so your brain is full of file cabinet drawers, right? So if the right drawer could get pulled out and you could say, oh, okay, yeah, that piece of information, that's related to this, I can put that piece of information into this drawer, then you can remember it and you can learn it. So what I want you to do is I want you to try to think about, because you would have heard these words before in high school, probably very little. And so I want you to try to think about what were you doing in high school when you heard these words? What do you already know about them? Do you have a drawer in your file cabinet already that is discrete versus continuous? And what little things can you add to the drawer in your file cabinet? And then later in the course, we'll come back. I'll ask you to put a little bit in this file cabinet drawer today based on a Google search. And then later in the course, I'll keep saying to you, hey, open that file cabinet drawer in your brain called discrete versus continuous. Okay, let's talk more about what's in there and how it relates to our next topic of study. So I want you to do a Google search, and a bunch of different sites are going to come up. They'll probably be the same first sites that I got, and I kind of scrolled through them. I don't want you to spend an hour, right? Maybe 10, 15 minutes tops, just kind of reading, scanning, looking at diagrams. I like the websites that have some diagrams, right? So look at some pictures of graphs and just try to see if you can put a little bit of information into this drawer in the file cabinet. Okay, so write down some terms and see what you might already remember from high school.